I see myself as kind of like a documentation specialist, that I'm a big fan of like making sure things look right on the page and making sure information architecture is correct. And I think I take a very different perspective to this. And what I mean by that is I'm a big fan of AI optimizing the human and human optimizing AI. Keep humans in the loop, yes, for review, but also keep humans in the loop that there's a manual backup. So what I've started doing is like taking it to a more granular level, like as well as pages being self-contained that AI can get the answer that it needs, is every paragraph self-contained? Does it express? I was just going to say that the way that I look at it is AI is optimization, not replacement.
Welcome to the Knowledge Base Ninjas podcast, where Gauri Ramkumar of Document 360 finds the best SaaS self-service knowledge bases in the world and then interviews their creators. Let's get started with today's episode.
All right, let's start. Welcome everyone to the Knowledge Base Ninjas podcast. And I have Gareth Brinn, Documentation Manager at Gravitee, today with us. Hi Gareth, how's life?
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here. Life is good. The weather is cooling down in London, so I can finally go outside again.
Absolutely. Great. So before we ask anything about documentation and what's happening around us, just help me understand, how did you get into documentation, and a little bit more about yourself, and how are you enjoying your role?
Yeah, so about me, I'm Irish born and raised, but I currently live in London now for the past 2 years. As how I got into documentation, I actually took the road less traveled. When I went to university, I did an English degree, fell in love with writing, and then I ended up doing a master's in technical communication and e-learning from the University of Limerick. And I got really lucky then that I managed to get a graduate technical writing position straight after my master's. So I submitted my thesis on a Thursday and I started my first technical writing job the following Monday. So that's how I got into documentation. So I'm coming at this role from kind of a different perspective. So engineer, it's often engineer turned writer. I'm now writer, maybe masquerading as an engineer now as well. So especially in the world of AI, that's kind of given us the tools to be able to do that. So that's how I got here. I see myself as kind of like a documentation specialist, that I'm a big fan of like making sure things look right on the page and making sure information architecture is correct and all those fun kind of things. Like, I'm a strong believer that all good docs start with the correct verb. So like, do people need to know something? Do they need to install something? Do they need to, I don't know, delete something? So that's how I kind of see myself in the world of documentation. So I've been at this role now for about 5 years now. So through a history of UX writing, hardware writing, API documentation, API management, to open source, to now agent management now as well. So I've covered a variety of topics and I'm very lucky to have been able to do that as well.
Congratulations on your 5 years going on in the field. And
Thank you.
yeah, lots must have changed. So let's dig a little bit deeper into how things have changed as you started the journey. So, in your experience, where does manual documentation outperform AI generated documentation?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think I take a very different perspective to this. And what I mean by that is I'm a big fan of AI optimizing the human and human optimizing AI. So when we talk about manual documentation, I think it needs to be more framed as manual context building. So how do you build the correct knowledge sources and the correct like context for agents to generate content correctly? So, and humans always need to be in the loop anyway. I'm a big fan of that. I think it's an absolute necessity that you should always have, even if you've wired up all your agents to code bases and style guides. Often enough, unless you strictly enforce rules with like CI/CD pipelines, which isn't even AI, you still need to check it. You need a subject matter expert, an SME, to jump in and review something, and you need a technical writer to sign off on it. What I find is AI generated content it's only as good as what you put into it. So like the manual human side of things is the knowledge and the human experience. So keeping human judgment where it's needed most. So what is the user journey, interacting with customers to understand what is their biggest issues with the documentation. Because
Mhm.
I don't think, unless you have an amazing knowledge base behind the scenes, I think that, and that's always going to be static anyway. So you need somebody to keep that up to date. So I think where human kind of manual is still needed is kind of the foundational layer at the very least. But that's just, we're talking basic kind of
Yeah.
context layering. And I think that's where we'll always outperform the AI agents. Yes, they can put pros together. That has kind of drifted away from us, probably in the best way possible, because now we can show our skills in much more impactful ways. But I think human generated content is AI optimized content. So if you see
Yeah.
AI optimized content, it's because a human has put in the manual work to get it there.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's always human in the loop.
Yes, always. I always like when we what I often found was when this all started kicking off of AI in our kind of field is what I found was people thought they could build one agent to rule them all and it would do everything. Whereas I don't really see it like that. I've spent
Mhm.
quite a lot of time in like tools like N8N that kind of use like a node approach. You pass information from one mode to another or one task to another. And that's how I see like my AI workflows and agents that you kind of have to chunk it into tasks and contexts and always have a human in the loop that
Yeah.
if a node in that workflow breaks, a human can jump in and say, okay, I will do what this AI agent or workflow was supposed to do to keep the process moving. So not only are we one of the biggest things that I think that we should also do is like keep humans in the loop, yes, for review, but also keep humans in the loop that there's a manual backup to AI kind of workflows so that if for whatever reason something stops working, the lights don't turn off. We can keep them on. Maybe they might be flickering a bit, but they're still on.
It's still on. That's true. So then I think you very vaguely touched upon how you do it, but then can you help us understand a little bit better as to how the documents you create ranks well, reads well, and is well understood by AI? So obviously humans are going to be in the loop all the time, but are there any tips and tricks that you can share as part of how do we do it nicely?
Yeah, what I think is most surprising is like whenever I see this question, in my head, what I always find is it's all the skills that we already have, I think are probably the most beneficial. Maybe this is me coming at it from a documentation kind of specialist role rather than an engineering one. But what
Mm-hmm.
I find is you look at our core principles, like you look at like the plain language rules, or you look at like the concept of chunking or topic based writing that keeps information extremely clear and self-contained because an AI won't read like everything from start to finish. And it won't like, oh, I think I need to read this article to understand another one. It won't do that. It just won't find the answer. Or at least it doesn't in my experience when working with docs in that kind of way. What I find then is when you apply things like self-contained writing and chunking and single sourcing like with particles is AI then can grab the answer that it needs. So what I've started doing is like taking it to a more granular level, like as well as pages being self-contained that AI can get the answer that it needs. Is every paragraph self-contained? Does it express a single idea or a single task? Does every step tell you what you need to do? Like, does it clearly mark the UI label and maybe the error message? And I think all those kind of rules that we've built kind of strong documentation on, I still think is relevant to AI. And then you have, of course, the other things layered on top of that, like making sure like you have MS files and
Yeah.
you have things not indexed if they don't need to be indexed and having information in a readable way. And if you're using ASCII doc, it's time to move to Markdown because
Mhm.
that is what agents prefer to use. So we have all those contexts in the background. But I think what scares or maybe technical writers find a challenge is, oh, my skills are out of date because AI is coming for my job. I don't believe that. But I think we just need to remember our core principles and how that
Yeah.
also helps agents and then adapting to that. Like one of the biggest things is like agents love a question and an answer. Can I do this? Yes or no? So it's like, do FAQs make a comeback? I don't know. Maybe they will. But so we have to think about things like that. And then if it is like we just need an FAQ section, maybe, well, like, okay, let's dig out those old skills and how do we write those in an amazing manner that AI can pick that up. So how it ranks well, then it's like you have all then what I find as well is like I'm starting to branch out to other departments that I traditionally never worked with. Like for example, marketing. How do I
Yeah.
write good meta descriptions that it ranks well in SEO and AEO? Do I need alt text on all the images, which I should, but do they have them? Things like that. And it's trying to understand then, like, is the information architecture correct that if you give it a file tree, can it find the answer through the file tree? So there's all
Yeah.
these different elements. And I think it's really pushed us to understand other departments. And that's how I kind of look at it. It's just keep doing what I do well. And I think then by collaborating with other departments, then like maybe if you have an AI engineering department, understanding more how do agents work in the background? What do they need to survive? And then how do we rank in agent search results and SEO? So working with marketing, then to understand what do I need to do to optimize for that then as well. So I think what we're finding is something that we've always done. We've always been that mediator between like product and engineering and the user. So
Yeah.
I don't think our job is gone. I think it's evolving now that now we're like a mediator between several more departments all of a sudden. And I think that's even more vital because our role then will be to bring all that knowledge together in our documentation in a more impactful way than we ever have before.
Absolutely. Nice way to look at the future. And
Yeah.
yeah, we spoke a lot about human presence in the
Mhm.
process throughout documentation, even though AI takes does maybe some of the elements. But which part of the process, particularly documentation process, you think human strong human touch is needed more when compared
Um,
to other elements?
yeah, I think it's stage one is always the most important. So building up, if you're starting from scratch, for example, it's developing the user journeys because an AI,
Mm.
like my experience, won't have that human touch needed to understand your customers and prospects at the level that you would by interacting with like your solutions engineers and your customer support teams and understanding what are people actually looking for. Yes,
Yeah.
you can like wire an agent up to a code base, but that's only going to tell you the technical elements. It's not going to tell you what a user actually needs from that documentation. Only we can do that, and we've been doing that since the dawn of time. So I think that's still important, and like developing information architectures are quite important as well, and drafting that. And of course, you can optimize it. Like something that I want to look at doing in the future, maybe is like developing what I call like a wayfinding agent that I give it personas and then I say, hey, look at my information architecture tree. You are a CTO. Go find the docs that you think are important and tell me if you could find them and if you couldn't, why. So there's ways to optimize yourself, but I think like having at the very beginning the human user experience element is something that we really need to understand and making sure that the knowledge is meaningful. I think historically companies have had this idea that a customer has an issue, create a doc for it. A solution engineer ran into an issue on a proof of concept. Okay, I'll just create a whole new page for it. So,
Yeah.
like, and what we find is like that is something that agents don't like. The more information that you give it, the more it kind of just it freaks out basically, and it's like this is too much. I can't go through all of this. So what I think what we really need to do is, and it's once again something that we've always been doing, is ensuring that information is meaningful. So, and are we putting it in the right place? Will an agent find it? If we're talking about self-contained, like if we have a reference of error messages, will an agent know to go to that page to find the correct error message to solve a solution? Who knows? Maybe it will, maybe it won't. Can we take that risk? I don't know. So let's just put the error message on the relevant page instead, so that if an agent is only reading that page, it has everything that it needs. So
Yeah.
I think that's also very important is understanding where information needs to go to be the most impactful and meaningful. And then, of course, we've already touched on this. I think what's really important is to monitor the workflow as a whole. Um, what I always say is docs and docs workflows are never done, they're just maintained. So by developing one docs workflow and saying, okay, that's it done, I think it's the wrong approach. I think like you'll always hit edge cases. There will always be an evolution within your documentation because like as you develop new features and new user journeys,
Yeah.
you're going to have to update the workflows because they were built on a snapshot in time. So I that's also quite important where we're needed. And I think it is important for us to own those docs workflows, like instead of like operation teams or AI engineers, because we're the ones that need to go in and understand where it needs to be fixed. And plus, then you like remove those like single points of failure. That if we need to update a workflow quickly because we have a release coming out next week, and the ops team, for example, say, oh, we can't get to it for a month, what do you do then? So I think we need to own those workflows. So I still think that's where we need to kind of step in. And then, of course, as per usual, as like even with traditional kind of workflows, we need to be the ones reviewing it with the SMEs then as well, making sure that the AI generated content is correct, making sure no like our style guide was enforced. And if it wasn't, then enforcing it and always questioning the AI and making sure it's like, did you do this? Like, even if you notice, like, for example, if your style guide said, don't use contractions,
Mm-hmm.
a contraction, then you should be going, uh-oh, let me go in. Did you follow the style guide? And if it said, oh, I skipped rules 1, 2, 3, okay, then we need to fix the workflow. And then I need to apply these before this goes out. So those are kind of the three main areas that I see us. It's like setting up the, just to summarize, setting up the AI workflow for success with like correct user journeys and how information should be structured, maintaining the workflow, and finally verifying everything before it goes to publication. I still think I make it a rule that like all tech writers have to approve pull requests for the doc side. I still think that is absolutely needed.
Got it, got it. And there is always a thought, right? Makes content AI makes content creation very easy. And you just spoke about how more information could also cause confusions with AI. Now, because AI can make content so easily, are we at risk of producing more documentation than we used to do in the past? What's your take on this?
Yeah, and I think so. And I think it's kind of, I think there's a positive way to look at that. As if you are a lean team and or a sole technical writer, we can produce more content, but if we do it in a governed way,
Yeah.
then we can start filling those gaps. If you're like a lone technical writer and you're told I need 3 new troubleshooting guides and I need to get all these features documented by Friday, it's finally possible to be able to keep up with that. And I do think producing more content isn't necessarily a bad thing as long as you're doing it in a governed and optimized way. Now, the other issue is like something that I've been thinking quite a lot about is how to decentralize content production because it is easy now. The
Right.
pro side of it is much more doable now because of AI. But if you're decentralizing kind of content production and putting into the hands of project managers or SMEs in any shape or form or support staff, how are they contributing? What are they doing to ensure guardrails are up and following the style guide? So
Mm-hmm.
I do think we can produce more content, but it's more how do we govern it? And that's by like making sure like have a centralized repo that everyone pulls on, that if they're creating documentation, they use workflow A that has all these skills attached to it that will catch 101 different things. Because, for example, like, what if there's sensitive information? Is everyone going to remember to sanitize sensitive information if they're producing documentation? Who knows? You would hope so, but maybe
Yeah.
that might not be the case. So it's setting up those governed workflows to make sure that every step of the way is controlled. And I don't think it's less of a risk about producing more documentation. I think it's more about how do we avoid the risk? How do we
Right.
avoid it becoming a risk rather than it being a risk in itself?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, right?
Yeah, it is. And I think that is always going to be up for debate, and I don't think that will change.
Yeah, absolutely. Another hypothetical question, if I can put it that way. Have you been in situations where you found, oh, AI actually saved a lot of time for me, but then it actually has created additional effort behind the scenes teams?
So, what I think, that's a really good question. So, I think for us, our biggest win that I just spoke about on LinkedIn was producing content with feature work for feature work by looking at code diffs and using like an N8N workflow to do that, which was a major win for us. I think where it might create more work for people is, for me, I find you should always aim for quality, not speed, when it comes to AI workflows. So testing, reviewing, and scrutinizing is probably where it takes up a lot of work, but it has it's what would you say, small pain for a lot of gain. Because what
Yeah.
I find is if we don't scrutinize those workflows and you're like, great, I just developed something really quickly and let me put it into production. And next thing you have somebody going, oh, you made this mistake, or blah de blah, you shouldn't have said this, or there's all these different scenarios that could happen. And then next
Mhm.
thing that is creating more work and putting yourself kind of in a more precarious position. So I think when we talk about it creating more work for us, I think it's about the quality standards. And this is where I think working with like AI engineers is crucial. Or if you have like an AI enablement team in your company, working closely with them to say, hey, I have created this workflow. Can you QA it for me to make sure nothing happens? That,
Yeah.
and I think that's where the work comes in. I think if you try to say like, oh, I need to speed up support ticket deflection, let me just
Mhm.
quickly push out this workflow and that should do it. That will cause more work behind the scenes than needed and more firefighting. So I think that's where the real work comes in. And I think if you put in the effort to do quality control at the very start, um, that would avoid all those issues.
So I think we spoke a lot about AI the last few minutes. I'm now going to just switch over to the rapid fire question. Any documentation related resources you can share with us today?
Resources that I always rely on traditionally are, one that I always end up going back to is the Global English Style Guide, I believe it's called, for translation. Because I think even if you don't write for translation, having rules built on the need for translation are amazing because they make you think about the language way more and how it should be optimized. And then I think that would also serve you that if your company suddenly decides, I need our documentation in German, we're hiring a translator, that will
Right.
serve you in the future. In terms of other resources that I always look at, I always remind myself of the plain language guidelines, of course. Every page is page one was a book that I remember during my master's degree I read about 3 times, and it's stuck with me ever since. Um, I've seen then there's people online. What I've just started reading is Docs' Tests with AI by Manny Silva. I've just started that to understand how I can create self-healing docs more efficiently than I am. What I always think about then as well is obviously Tom Johnson, who I'd rather be writing,
Yeah.
a staple in our community. And in terms of resources, what I always recommend to people, something that I've actually found super beneficial is I go to Write the Docs London meetups. And I
Oh,
always
okay.
learn something new at those meetups because it's a different topic every month. And like I learned, like the last one that I went to, I learned about how they use documentation to build their learning management system and their courses. And it was using single sourcing. And I thought that's amazing. Like I never thought of that. So it's
Yeah.
having those kind of different ideas. I think finding community is incredible to like really discuss and bounce your ideas off people. So yeah, if you have a write the docs kind of meetup close to you or an online community, I do believe there's an online Slack community as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's incredibly beneficial as well.
Oh, so I come there very regularly as well. I've missed last month one because I don't know if it happened either, but because of holidays, but
Yeah.
yeah, been there last few months. Nice. Hopefully, we'll meet again in the
Yeah.
upcoming months. Yeah. Now, one word that comes to your mind when you hear documentation.
One word. Oh God. I think it's vital.
Vital. Yeah.
Yeah, I do think so. I think documentation will has more of an impact than some people realize. And something that a bit of advice, if anybody's listening looking to get into this into the field, something that I always say is that we have to come to terms with is good documentation goes unnoticed. So if you get hired into a company and you're doing a good job and you're like, wow, maybe you feel like I'm not getting recognition or anything, that's a really good thing because it means the documentation is working well. Then brought it up to the sales team or the support team, or anything like that. So yeah, so if you feel like you're going unnoticed, that's a job well done.
Of course, of course. My last question to you for the day is a piece of advice you would give to your 20-year-old self.
One piece of advice. Oh, that's a good one. A piece of advice that I give to my 20-year-old self is to reach out and join communities sooner. I think I relied on books and internal knowledge too much when relying on other people and start branching out more. So learn all the skills that you think that you'll need. So reach out to an engineer, shadow them, reach out to marketing, learn about SEO, and really look more holistically. I think when I started, I was really focused about what was on every individual page, rather than looking at like a doc site as a whole and what was the experience as a whole. So I would tell 20-year-old me to think about the bigger picture and look way beyond just the words on the page.
Right, that's a nice one. Thank you. So it looks like you're doing wonderful job with AI, and I think a very different perspective to keep AI
Yeah,
next as one of your team member and not consider it as, oh, it's going to take my job. So
no, no,
that's
absolutely not.
really nice.
I was just going to say that the way that I look at it is AI is optimization, not replacement. That's how I look at it.
Thank you. That's really nice to hear, and all the very best for your future projects and for the current ones as well. Anything else you would like to add before we say bye to this
No,
podcast?
no, I think we've covered it, but thank you for having me. I've had a great time.
Thank you, Gareth. It was lovely connecting with you, and we spoke quite a lot actually today. And yeah, absolute pleasure to have you. And see you later.
See you later. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Knowledge Base Ninjas podcast. Please head to iTunes, rate, and provide honest feedback on the podcast. See you next week.